With it looking ugly.
You got 10 minutes, so...
Yeah, I'm trying to work out
Has Leonard got one?
I don't think so. You want me to go ask him?
You could.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. What do we get? Oh, cool.
Do you have the...
We do.
Yes, I do.
All right, awesome. So
Okay.
get as Mr. Charles, we'll hook him up with copious amounts
Of swag and
of Carbine t-shirts.
yeah, you bet.
Do we have a power plug somewhere, Chris? That's what we will need.
Yes. Is this the? Is this our power plug or?
What's that?
Is this our power plug?
Oh, I just need the outlet somewhere, because
Yeah, that's
I have to have use an adapter anyway, because
Oh, it doesn't
it's this freaky German adapter stuff here. I hope you will not be too confused, because this is my only computer that has a German keyboard.
Fortunately, all we're going to need to do is just
All I need to do is hit
advance
space.
it. Yeah.
We should probably just test it to see if it looks right. If it looks right, then
Yeah, we
we can go through the rest of it. Fun.
Wait, I have it right here.
Tobias,
It
we're
slowly
working
turns on right now, so yeah.
You are a lifesaver.
You plug this small right here.
Enjoy yourself, Tim.
That's yours.
It's fun. It's exactly how I pictured it. Flawless from start to finish.
My bag back here, so
We're not going to use that then. I just tap through.
it just takes a
Yeah.
moment here.
Sure. All right.
Alrighty, we'll move on.
On here for another session.
Where's your
I had
thumbnail?
a session on Tuesday, not in this room, but in
So there's a file on there.
let's give it a second.
Sure.
The problem with netbooks is they're not really fast booting. Somehow it's not plugged in down here.
It says it's not plugged in, or?
It says it's not plugged in.
You do that at 5 minutes before the hour or 5 minutes?
Wait. No, it's still.
Yeah,
We had some time.
it to be about
Always because I couldn't charge it, that's the problem. No, it's off. It just goes on and off. Let me have a look in here.
It's not too bad right now, but people keep coming in the way this starts to happen. They'll be like, these pockets of seats, nobody will move over, and then they'll go down. How much time do you have? Like 5 minutes. 2 minutes. So it doesn't look bad now, like I said, but I think it looks like this, right?
That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, how about now? It's the red light's on, so it's staying on.
Should we test it?
Now you see?
Okay.
Test that it even shows up well.
We are doing that right now.
I'm just opening up your activate the second screen. Oh, I need still the cable for the screen. Okay, here.
Down to the wire. I hope it displays correctly. Yep.
We just screwed the lights. That's what happened in the stuff. It was a presentation. Killed 5 minutes.
Someone was like,
Ta-da!
okay.
Okay, now.
Let's open up presentations. And can you install that con?
It just has to be in the same folder as the presentation.
It just has to be?
Yeah. If it's in the same folder, if you move it to your...
Yeah. Doing good.
Great. I'm good. I'm more nervous probably coming over here.
You're still good.
Let's make that movement announcement right now.
No. You want me to just tell everybody to
Yeah,
kind of...
you can try and take fill out the GDC so other people can like sit down.
Sure. Is this on? There we go.
There we go.
Thank you.
You are the man. And then you give a space bar to second thread? Perfect.
What's back?
Arrows, right? It just takes a little bit of time. You are seriously.
Yeah. Can I give you my answer later?
All right, Tim. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Could I ask people to move towards the center of the rows so people in the back can come in and sit down? Thank you. All right. Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We had some technical difficulties, but I think we've resolved them. My name is Timothy Cain, and you're in the session for storytelling and MMORPGs. The subtitle is I'm a special snowflake just like you. I can explain that title a little more. I love playing MMOs. I've been playing them for 20 years, since they were called MUDs. And you can only play them on very isolated academic systems. I've been playing them mainly because I enjoy playing RPGs in a group setting, but there's always something I miss in MMOs, mainly how stories make the player kind of be central to the game itself. And when I play most MMOs on the market, and right now I'm playing a half a dozen of them daily, it's just what I do, I find that I'm not feeling any kind of special or unique position in the world, and I find what I tend to do is theme my character groups and make my friends kind of participate in group storytelling with me, because I find myself needing more story out of these MMOs. Currently, I think I'm playing Champions with a group that I call the Four Gymnasts of the Apocalypse. I'm playing Nausea Komonichi. But I've been doing this for years. I played the Brady Bunch kids in EverQuest. I played the Spice Girls in World of Warcraft. I'm also playing a group in World of Warcraft based on obscure Simpsons characters. But what I would like to do before I talk about anything else, I want to go straight to the meat of the talk. I want to tell you what I'm going to try to be doing in my MMO, and then I'll go into details of how I'm going to do it. Specifically, I think this is a good slide for Austin because I've been here for 4 days, and it seems like all I've eaten is meat. So the gist of my talk is to tell a good story in an MMO. We don't have to abandon the classic MMO cliche of what I call zone stories. And these are in every single MMO. I'm calling them zone stories and not quests because some MMOs are abandoning the idea of quests and going into either public quests or missions. So it doesn't matter how the MMO works, but my basic idea of a zone story is something that you go into a zone, a new area, you talk to an NPC who gives you a mission. Maybe his daughter's been kidnapped. Maybe his cat's up a tree. And you tend to do these missions in about 15 or 20 minutes. You go back to the NPC. You might get more quests. You might go to other quests, NPC givers around them. But you're pretty much doing these very, very quickly. And most NPCs follow, or most MMOs follow this rule of zone stories. And it's because it's how players tend to get used to playing MMOs, and they want to be able to go through this content quickly. What I want instead, though, is I want something like, another technical difficulty. I want something like this. I want to play that guy. I want an epic world story that spans through multiple zones in the game, takes hours for me to play through, and involves my character doing something pivotal to the world. In other words, what I want is what single-player RPGs give me, which is the ability to participate in a really long storyline, something lasting maybe 40 hours. And this turns out to be very difficult to do in an MMO because you're playing with thousands of other people who are trying to do the same thing you are and are probably interrupting your storyline. But I think it's possible. I will go into details, but I just want to say if I'd given this talk 6 weeks ago, I would be jumping to the details right now. But we've tested this method with people in our current MMO, and we found that it lacks something. We were missing something very crucial to get people involved at the very beginning of the game. So I did what all designers do, and I stole an idea. What I did was I went back to a game I'd made called ARCANUM and stole the idea of backgrounds. I'm letting the ArenaNet guys think I stole it from Guild Wars 2, but I stole it from ARCANUM. What a background is, it's something you pick in the game, and you let the player pick it at character creation time, that gives him both a bonus and a disadvantage. In ARCANUM, they were things like you're stronger but dumber, or you start off with a lot of extra equipment, but people don't like you as much because you're richer. These are things that the player can decide to do. The player gets to pick when he makes a character creation, so he gets a buy-in right away on this background story. And I found that if we added these to our current MMO, people who were playing the game for the first time understood why they were there playing the game. So they felt an immediate buy-in and an attachment to their character. Then they played through zone stories, and then we got to the epic world story. So before we go into detail on that, oh my. That's not good. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Okay, let me try doing that. I'm going to take a little break.
If you right-click, it'll stop.
Yeah, it's in German. Which one is it? Is it off minute?
Yeah. I don't know where the guy is that owns this laptop.
Tobias, could you help me out for a second? Again? Or someone who reads German? Our laptop didn't work, and we borrowed a laptop, but the OS is in German.
Right-click again. Bang. Thank you. We just need to install this font.
Should I? I'm trying to install a type font. Should I Fettig or Drucken?
Yeah.
What do you need to know? I speak German.
Okay.
We need to install this font.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Okay.
You want this font installed in Windows?
Yeah. If you just right click on it, doesn't it?
Process, I think right click or so, right?
Copy.
Yeah, that's copy, exactly.
Ich spreche auf Deutsch.
Okay, good.
Yeah, let me,
Ist doch Deutsch, okay.
Okay, schön.
Kind of slides.
it's all right.
Should work
All right,
eventually.
let's
Let's
see.
try now.
Yeah, we're gonna, we'll see here momentarily.
Do I have to shut down the presentation?
Yeah, shut it down and open it up again. We're gonna shut it down and open it up. I think it needs to recognize that.
Where is it?
This should be on the thumb drive.
Yeah, but where's the thumb drive? Yeah, I'm using
Recent
someone else's.
documents.
I need to open the thumb drive.
Oh, okay. You put your slideshow on that thumb drive into this.
Yes.
PC? Okay.
Our laptop would not display on this.
Gotcha. And then at some point during the slide, all the letters showed up as boxes. Right. There's a font installed.
Yeah,
on the
we're-
computer
right.
that's not-
We just installed.
We're gonna try to, yeah, we just installed it.
Cool.
Perfect.
Sorry, I'm just jumping in and trying to.
No, understood, thanks.
This one.
Yep.
Yeah, it should be one of those. Probably
Which one?
probably the G drive. That's it. Well, let's see if that works. See if it works. Okay, cross the fingers. Thank you. Alrighty, we're back in business. I'll have to learn German. So I was saying that these background stories and zone stories and world stories are something that you're used to seeing in single-player RPGs for the last 30 years. And I kind of wanted to explain my background because I'm heavily biased towards single-player RPGs. I've been in the industry for 30 years. Actually, next year will be my 30th anniversary. And I've had a lot of different roles in those 30 years. I've been a programmer and a producer and a designer. So I've actually come at the problem of how to tell a story in a game from a bunch of different angles, including budgetary. And the only role I haven't played is an art director, which is my goal someday to be an art director, even though I'm colorblind and I can't draw. So all the games I've made, probably in the last 15 years, have been role-playing game related. All of them have approached storytelling pretty much in the same fashion. I'm a big fan of nonlinear games, of letting people play any way they want. I'm a big fan of of letting the player have multiple endings. So if he chooses to play differently, the game can end in a different way. These are all things that are kind of antithetical to most MMOs. You usually play an MMO the way the designer intended, and MMOs don't end. So again, that's a problem we usually run into. Now, in single-player RPGs, when you're telling a story, you have the big advantage in that since the player is the only one in the world, you can make the entire story revolve around him. You can also make sure that whenever the player does an action, you can reflect it in the world and have NPCs change their opinions. You can have villages burned down. You can have entire cities disappear from the world because everything the player does can be reflected in the world. He's the prime mover. Now, most single-player RPGs either go in a linear fashion, meaning you're expected to go through and play every zone in a particular order, or if they're nonlinear, they either do one of two things. They either adjust the player's level or the monster's level to the player's level. So Oblivion did that. If you played in the game in a different order than your friend, you would see monsters become different levels as you went to different zones. The way I usually did that is I let the player play anywhere he wanted, and if he got to an area that was over his head, he would just have to come back later. But the biggest thing about single-player RPGs is when you get to the end, they're done. They usually show what happens in the world, and then they can let you keep playing, but in effect, the storyline is over. In an MMO, we have a lot of problems trying to use this model. First of all, you're playing an MMO with thousands of other people simultaneously, and most servers in modern MMOs have tens of thousands of player characters on them, just perhaps not playing at that time. It's hard to feel special and unique when there's thousands of other people doing exactly what you're doing. Furthermore, players often skip zones in MMOs because they're playing with their friends. If my friends are playing a level 20 zone and I'm 15, I can skip ahead and play with them, an option I might not have had in a single-player RPG. Another problem we see in a lot of MMOs is I may get so into playing a particular subset of a zone, maybe a dungeon or maybe a play space, that I'll grind that zone so much that I'll out-level the rest of the zone. And when I come out of this dungeon, I'll just skip and go to the next zone available to me. It's hard to make a storyline be coherent and consistent with a group of players if they're all at different levels. It's really hard to make a challenging story for someone who's level 10 and someone who's level 50. I particularly hate forced content, and forced content in MMOs comes in a variety of ways. It's delivered as in-game cinematics that you're required to watch, or very large quest text you're required to read through. Most players skip that, so it's really hard to deliver a story, and if you force players to watch it, they tend to react negatively to that. Another important point is if you are going to tell a world story, and in my game a world story is something that lasts 20, 30, 40 hours, as opposed to a zone story, which lasts 15 minutes. A lot of people will need to know the difference between those. So if you're playing through a zone and you get two quests, and one is a zone story and one is a quest story, a world story, players are going to want to know what the difference is, because they're going to want to know, are they committing for 15 or 20 minutes of play, or are they committing for 20 hours of play? And you see this in a lot of MMOs that have dungeon quests clearly marked, so that the player knows, oh, I've got to get 3 friends, and I'm going to be committed for 2 hours to play that quest. So if you're trying to do a world story that lasts 40 hours, you've really got to distinguish those quests from regular quests. And then lastly, most players of an MMO are used to never finishing playing that MMO. They want to keep playing for years and years and years, and it's hard to make a story just keep going that long. So here are some approaches that we've tried. Our game has been in development for 5 years. Here's some stuff we've tried and some things we've seen in other games to try to tell a story in an MMO. The first one is something I call lore bombs, which I actually saw in an interview with some Bethesda folks. And that's when you walk up to a quest giver and click on them, and you get this enormous wall of text. And nobody reads it. Even if it's voiceover, the guy usually says, oh, I'm the mayor, and you click. And you have no idea what he's asking you to do. If you're trying to tell a story through that text, you're not going to get it across to the player. Another way of doing this, of telling story to the player, is through movies, especially in-game cinematics. Most people click through those anyway, and if you don't, then you're into the problem of forced content. I'm not a big fan of telling a story through a movie in a game, mainly because people would like to be more active in the story, and they didn't really decide to play a game so they could spend 2 hours watching cinematic sequences. Another option was to make the entire game linear so that you could roll out the story and everybody would get it in the correct order. I'm not a very big fan of linear games, and I think I've explained why you really can't force an MMO player to play a game linearly anyway. He's going to probably more often play with his friends and go in whatever direction he wants to go. And if you try to force him to finish his own before he can go to the next one, they're going to be really unhappy that they can't play with their friends. And that's a big feature of an MMO, is if you're playing with like 4 of your friends and you form a group, you're really disappointed when you all can't play the same content. Some MMOs have tried to do instanced worlds where only places like cities are non-instanced, and then when you actually go into the world to do your adventure, you go into an instance. I'm not a big fan of this because it makes the world seem disjoint, and it makes the world seem emptier when you go out there. And I also don't want to play an MMO and not see lots of other players playing. And I like the emergent behavior that occurs when you go into a dungeon or you go into a play space in the world and you see other people there besides you. Maybe they help you, maybe they grief you, but it causes a sort of shared world experience. Another way we tried to tell a story is by making every zone be the equivalent of a short story or a chapter in a novel. And then when all the zones are played together, it would become a novel, a complete set of stories. But because MMO players will play these zones out of order, it's like reading a novel by reading the chapters in a random order. And it was very difficult. We actually did try this. It was very hard on our writers to tell a story where you may not have encountered an NPC, you may not have known about a certain event, and you can't refer to anything outside of that chapter. And finally, we tried a sandbox approach, which worked in a lot of my single-player games, where you just play in a nonlinear fashion, and the story is what emerges out of the game. Fallout was like this. To some extent, ARCANUM was like this. But that's very hard to do in an MMO because I think an emergent story where there's 1,000 people interacting with the world at the same time is very incoherent. So we tried all of these, and what we ended up doing was we wrote a really long 40-hour storyline and moved it to the end of the game. So effectively, our world story becomes a reward for players who've reached level cap. And this turned out to be a really cool thing for us to do because when we were designing this story, you could assume the player had already met all of the NPCs, and if they hadn't, there may be a few they haven't met, but they get the gist of the story, that they've been all throughout the world, and also that they're incredibly powerful. So you can write a storyline where the player is saving the world or saving the universe or whatever is happening in the story, and it makes sense. It's really hard to explain to a character at level 2 why he's so important and why he's saving the world when he can be killed by a rabbit. And this brings us around to the background stories and what I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. We found that when players would play our MMO, they didn't quite understand that this epic world story was coming. So what we did was we let them pick a story that they wanted to play through right at the beginning. And the way it works is in our character creation system, you actually read different backgrounds, pick one, and immediately jump into a game where that background story is forefront. And I'll explain that in a minute. But what that means is most of the quests that you're going to encounter have to do with your background. The nice side effect of this was that background actually acted as a tutorial because the player knows if I selected a background, say I'm going to go try to rescue my sister who's been kidnapped, you know that's what you're going to be doing. And as you get your new character abilities, they're tailored to help you try to rescue your sister. So you know I'm going to be fighting these guys, I'm going to be scaling that wall, I'm going to be using these new abilities that I've got. We also found that by picking these backgrounds from a list of backgrounds, we could actually incorporate world lore into the background stories, and people would read all of them. I think this is the difference between if I were to just hand you a T-shirt and say, here's a free T-shirt, you might glance at it and throw it over your shoulder and say thanks. But if I said, hey, I'll let you have one of these 5 T-shirts for free, you're going to look at each one of those T-shirts before you pick one because you're going to want to decide which one you want to take. So we find that when people are in the character editor and you give them, here are 6 or 7 backgrounds you can play in the game, they read each one of those backgrounds. So we've just secretly or subvertively gotten players to start reading the storyline by giving them an option of how they want to play their character. And then the middle of our game is still the same kind of mid-level content that you get in every MMO. And by that I mean after the player finishes their background story, which peters out about level 20 or 30, and I'll show you a graph of that in a minute. By the time the world story is over, they're now so engrossed in the actual playing of our game that we find that really all they care about is leveling up, getting their abilities and learning how to use them, finishing their item sets, learning how trade skills work, and trying to make money off of that because things are very expensive in our game. They're trying to complete quest episodes. They're looking at the achievement system because just accidentally they're starting to get achievements, and then they dive into the achievement system to see what they actually can get done. And they're also being social. They're forming guilds, making friends, going into dungeons. And we find that's more than enough to keep people moving forward in your game. Just the act of going up a level is a huge reward. And I want to point out that we don't stop telling stories just because the background story is over and the epic world story hasn't started yet. You're getting a lot of zone stories that involve local NPCs, their problems. You learn about locations. You find out what factions are in control of what zones. And these are all things that are going to be really important because when we get to the end story, we're going to use this all as background. So this is effectively how we've broken down quests in our world. You can see the background quests start at nearly 100% of the quests that we give have to do with your background. And it peters off very quickly. So about halfway, our level cap is 60. So by about level 30, you're getting hardly any background quests at all. And most of the background stories finish up. Meanwhile, we start to put in foreshadowing for the end story. So by the time you hit level cap, you're ready to hit the ground running and play through an epic 40-hour storyline. And the rest of the bulk of the quests are filled up with what we call the zone stories. Now you may ask me, how can I get 120% zone coverage in my zones? That's a different talk. So we find when the player gets to the end game, he's not leveling up anymore, which is actually a good thing because that's actually kind of distracting to tell a story. And the stage is set and you can actually roll out your epic storyline. So our world story, it spans the entire game world. We have the player go back to every single zone, every single location in the world when they're playing the story. It involves most of the NPCs you've met, which is why we have to make sure that our quest designers make memorable NPCs in every single zone. You may be going back to someone you haven't seen since you were level 10, and you want to remember, oh yeah, that's the guy whose daughter I rescued, or that's the guy who had a cat up a tree. We want this to be a 40-hour storyline with a beginning, a middle, and an end. So even though it was foreshadowed throughout the game, when you start playing it at level cap, it has a big introduction, you play it for 30 or 40 hours, and then it has an actual ending. And that's important because I want people to know that this is going to be kind of like a single-player RPG that has been, I don't want to say glued, put at the end of an MMO as a reward for people who reach level cap. Now, there's a lot of other things that you can do when you hit level cap, so I'll go into that as well. But the advantage we've already discovered in having an end game world story is having all the players at the same power level let us incorporate elements into the story that otherwise we could not. Like I said, one of the examples I gave was it's hard to tell people you're going to save the world if you're level 2. People just don't buy that. We could also throw out the chosen one storylines that are really common because you've already proven that you're effective. And I've seen some data, I don't remember the exact numbers, but a lot of people who play MMOs never reach level cap. I find that hard to believe, but it's something like the majority of people who start an MMO never reach level cap. So this is almost a reward for you when you get to the end of the game. You get to play this storyline. And the designers can assume by the time you get to level cap that you already know how to play your class. So they don't have to make adjustments or worry that the storyline has to be easy enough for everybody to play. You've already reached level cap. You should be really good at what you're doing. And you've already met all the NPCs, so they don't need introductions. You've gone to most zones, and more importantly, you have the means of getting places that you didn't when you were low level. Maybe you have the ability to teleport or hearth. Maybe you can have a flying mount or the ability to go places underwater that you didn't when you were level 10, which means the story really can be in very exotic locations. Let me give you some examples of how we actually incorporated the world story into the game I'm making now. So we have a really low-level zone at the beginning of the game that's ringed with mountains. Some of the mountains you can walk up to the top of, but most of them you can't. But you can see up there that there are keeps, or you can see monsters moving around, but you can't actually get to them. And if you ask NPCs in the zone, they tell you this is not, those are really powerful. You won't be able to get there until you acquire some special item. And if you actually do get a flying mount before end cap and you go up there, you're going to see the only place you have to land is swarming with elite level 60 mobs. This is not something you do as soon as you can fly. This is something you do when you're powerful enough to get there. I find it very aspirational for people to see these areas when they're low level and know they'll be able to come back and take on these frightening creatures when they're high enough level. I'm hoping it avoids griefing in those zones. I know there's a worry that when high level characters go back to low level zones, they grief low level players. But this gives something for those high level players to go off and do in that low level zone, so they're not just chewing through monsters in the low level play spaces. Another example of what we did is we actually put an instance right in the middle of a level 20 zone. And so you could see this keep, but if you went up to it, it would say you're missing a key. And if you go ask the NPC for the key, they're like, you're not ready, you haven't encountered the guardian of forever, some powerful NPC that's blocking this, and you know this is something involved in the world story. This is something you're going to be coming back to. And again, I like the idea of high-level characters being able to come back to low-level zones and re-experience some of the NPCs they met there in a different way. And because you're high level, I want these NPCs to come along with you, especially if it's an instance. So you're actually be adventuring with the people who used to send you off on quests. Another example we did is we put really high-level elite bosses with all their lieutenants right in the middle of one of our end cap zones. But they're really, really powerful, and you can't really kill them until you go on the world story. If you try to attack them, they just crush you. And then if you ask an NPC, they say, oh, for you to go on and attack that NPC, you're going to need a special item that you only get on the world story. And we find that to be very aspirational, and we find that people will do whatever they can to find where the story begins so they can start this long quest chain so they can get to this creature and get the fantastic items that they're sure he will drop. Now, this is part of what makes the world story feel so special to people. Our number one thing in designing it is to make sure that it was soloable, meaning this is something that players can do without their friends, but they can actually go through and play with their friends if they have to. Some people just enjoy playing MMOs by themselves. Other people like to play in a group. We're going to make sure that you can play this world story all by yourself. We're also going to show all the consequences to your actions while you're playing the world story from NPC reaction. So if you go into that dungeon and kill the big bad monster, when you come out, the NPCs are cheering you and telling you how it's wonderful that that thing was finally killed, and maybe there are vendors that have items for sale to you that they didn't have for sale before. So you actually see a difference happening in the world because you played the world story. We also have another feature from ARCANUM that I put in this game, which was a newspaper, which when you do major world events, the newspaper has an article about you, and everybody in the game sees this newspaper. So I'm hoping will serve as an aspirational feature in the game where people are seeing high-level players are seeing other high-level players go through these storylines, and it's something that you want to do yourself. Another thing that the world story will do, as I mentioned in example 2, is it will open access to instances you otherwise can't get into, and that's very inspirational for people to want to, or very aspirational for people to want to get into an instance that they've never seen before. And I mentioned the NPC reactions. These can also be negative. One of the things that I like is that when you're playing through a particular storyline, you may be angering people, and you have to live with the consequences of the actions you take in that story. Now, one thing that came up when we were designing this was we lost the ability to reward the player during the world story with experience points because he's already hit level cap. But we found that for many of the people playing, the story is its own reward. Being able to play through such an epic storyline in an MMO was just cool. So people did it even if we weren't giving them anything else. But what we do give when they're playing through the world story is items that are equivalent to the items you may get when you do high-level PvP or when you go on a raid. We have item sets that that only drop in the world story. We also give the player a great deal of money because that's always an incredible reward for players. We also put in recipes for trade skills that are rare drops in the world space, but when you're actually playing the world story, you have monsters that drop them every time. So people will want to play through the world story just to get these rare trade skill recipes. And finally, through the newspaper, people and players will get a sort of fame with other players. You'll be known as somebody who's gone through and done these things. Now, after the world story ends, there's still an awful lot for people to do. So I don't want people to think that you play our MMO, you get to level 60, you do the world story, and then you start over with a new character. We're going to have player versus player combat. We're going to have crafting. All these are integrated with the world story in the sense that you may get a really good PvP item drop from the world story, and then that encourages you to go play PvP. We have a lot of dailies for raising your faction, for getting items to complete item sets. We have an entire housing system in the game that's incredibly user customizable, and we think will take hundreds of hours for people to end up wanting to decorate their house exactly the way they want to. And again, the world story drops some pieces for your house that you won't be able to get anywhere else. And finally, we have dungeon raiding, which drops epic gear. So there's a lot of things you can do if you don't want to do the story. I also found that having a storyline at the end of the game provided a great mechanism for making an expansion to the world, if we want to make either a content patch or an expansion to the game. Because you're playing through the world story, you can leave a lot of loose ends. Maybe a lieutenant gets away. Maybe you don't actually manage to kill the villain at the very end. If that's true, then in the expansion, you can go after them. We also have new locations being hinted at by the NPCs. Maybe they arrived here from a continent that you can't currently get to. And also all the consequences that you had when you were playing the world story will come back to haunt you in the expansion. If you made a faction angry, if you killed an NPC that another NPC wants to avenge, all that will happen in the expansion. So what we found was having a world story at the end of the game led to really obvious tie-ins that players will understand when we put out a new game. All righty. Thank you very much. Questions?
I have an enormous respect for you, but what you describe is basically EverQuest, only better. Where do you see the next generation of RPG coming? This is the same gameplay, only better. Do you see any new gameplay beyond this?
Well, I think what you're describing and what you said was this sounds like EverQuest, only better. To me, that's a great compliment. And actually, that was the mission statement, if I understand it correctly, of the Blizzard team for World of Warcraft. They just tried to make WoW only better. And what I'm trying to do is take the next, make a evolutionary step for an MMO, and not necessarily a revolutionary one. And also, I think this shows my biases as making lots of single-player RPGs. I really want a single-player kind of vibe, a component to an MMO. Most of the people I know play solo most of the time. They just group occasionally. And I think having a big storyline that I can play through when my friends aren't available to play the group content would be a great addition to a game. And I'm basically just trying to bring that kind of sensibility to an MMO. Yeah.
So one of the problems you set out to solve, as I understood from the presentation, was the sort of Disneyland sense. Like I go through, and after I'm done, the world resets. The next
Right.
one is coming the same. I'm not sure I understand how the quest line that you're putting at the end of the story, as your game here, avoids that.
Well, there's two things we can do with that. And in a sense, it doesn't. And I've had to tell my designers I'm not trying to solve every problem that exists in an MMO by moving the storyline to the end, but it certainly avoided a lot of issues we had with it. Also, I kind of like the Disneyland approach of here's a big world for you to play in, and then here's a story that takes place in that world. One of the ways we get around it is, since some of the instances you can go into only exist for the world storyline, and the state can be stored, once you go into, say, that dungeon at the top of the mountain that you can only get to, it stays cleared out. Now, you can go and help a friend, and we kind of treat it like a phase issue, where if you're helping a friend on the storyline, you can drop back down to his phase and play through it. But you can have these consequences be permanent. As for, we can't actually have any external permanent consequences except things that are private between an NPC and a player. So how he feels towards you, what he offers you available to, in his inventory to sell. We can do that kind of change, but it really doesn't solve the problem of, hey, I would love to burn down this village and have it stay burned down. It doesn't really solve that. Yeah.
You mentioned a circumstance where there would be a large difficult boss in the middle of a zone, and you'd be a weakling player seeing it, not being able to fight it. But I imagine at the same time you would have players that are higher level than you swooping in and just axing it and then moving on. And I would wonder if you see that monster get killed, or maybe if you see the NPCs cheering for another player, does that kind of ruin the suspense or the surprise that might happen?
You're saying if you're in a zone and you see, and there's this boss monster, and you see an NPC, or you see a group of players who are on the world story come in,
yeah.
Well, what we can do with that actually is you can phase the fight.
Okay.
So no one will, you'll never actually see anyone else take on that monster unless you're the one involved doing it.
Okay.
So you may read about it in the paper, but you never actually witnessed it. What I want to do is I don't want the player ever to feel like what he's doing is following completely in the footsteps of other players. If I can, I kind of was hoping that the backgrounds would influence the world story as well. And if I can get that working, that would mean that the world story is a little different for every player who picked a different background. Maybe your sister, you're looking for your lost sister, and then she turns out to be the big baddie at the end. That would have new meaning for you if that was your sister up there versus someone else just going, oh, I don't know who this woman is, but I have to kill her now. So I'm hoping to throw a little emotional context like that into the game. Way in the back there.
So you were talking about sandbox content. You didn't really go into much detail on it. You said that it was incoherent. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit better on that and why you thought it was
Well, I think what it was, you were asking if I made a sandbox MMO, the storyline tends to be a little incoherent. I think because in a single-player game, there's nobody to help you, so I can design a sandbox game so that no matter what zone you go to, things kind of link together and a story emerges from it. But if you're playing an MMO, you have so many options of where to go, especially because your higher-level friends may take you somewhere that there's no way you'd survive on your own, but they're high level and they can take you with them when they go there. There's just no way for me to impart a story that makes sense where these NPCs you've never heard of, you've never gone and gotten any of the quests for, you're just tagging along with your friends, you have no idea what's going on. I have no way of even giving you that context. So in a single-player game, that could never happen. But in an MMO, that happens all the time. So that's what tends to make it incoherent. Right?
My question is how you rectify a certain potential problem that's different in the MMO space than a single-player game. That would be, given your own history, background, I loved all the games you made. I love the story. So if I'm, I would assume, should I play this game, it would be the same. If I get in a situation where I'm loving the story, but I get to certain missions that I hate, or even can't beat for some reason. In some of your single-player games, take for example, Bloodlines. I got to a point where, oh man, I'm bored with the game, but I love the story. There's cheats and stuff. You can just, let's move along and get to the story. Or Temple of Elemental Evil, there's maybe a bug I can't get past. You know what I mean? Like, I got another user's patch, and I get past it. You know what I'm saying? Like, but in an MMO, you obviously can't have that sort of thing. So how do you rectify that problem where if someone is really engaged in your story, but it's so quest-driven that you have to beat certain quests to move on, how do you get to that point where players are like, man, I love your story, but I'm sick of these missions?
Well, yeah, I think it does. Although I was surprised to hear there were any bugs in Temple of Elemental Evil. I think that what we can do there is, I said the world story is soloable, but you can play it with your friends. It gets much easier when you play it with your friends. So if you really are stuck at something, you do have the option of like grabbing a few friends and just going past that point, which is something you wouldn't have in a single-player game. So it would be effectively using your friends as either a cheat or a way to get past a bug. We also can patch MMOs have this wonderful ability that you can patch the stuff live. And one of the things we're doing is we're having people play the game and we're watching the metrics. We're actually seeing where people get stuck. We're seeing where they die frequently. And we're trying to smooth those areas over. The hardest part of this is since we have so many different classes, you have to make sure that the end game story is playable by all of them. And the best we've been able to do there is I can't guarantee that the story will be as hard for each class, but I can guarantee that all the classes will get challenged in the story at some point, probably a different point for each class.
In a traditional MMO, you end up designing hundreds, perhaps even thousands of quests. Then you end up adding in class quests, race quests, various other things. Now, background quests sound really interesting, but how much extra work should you have to anticipate for that? I mean, are we talking multiplying, or is this some sort of customization? How does this work?
Well, it is a lot more. We've actually, I think on our jobs board, we just opened 12 job recs related to this. But the way it compensates is at the beginning of the game, you have mostly just background quests. We don't really have a lot of zone quests at the beginning of the game. The background quests dominate. So the nice thing is we didn't have to build in our initial zones a lot of these low-level quests that feel like, and that's where a lot of the grinding feel comes from, because you're doing these very low-level quests that you've seen in other games. You're giving quests that are specific to your background, so you've just chosen that background. You just said, hey, I would like to PvP a lot, or I would like to follow clues, or I would like to explore. So you end up doing these things, and we don't have any zone quests for you to do. You don't start really seeing a lot of zone quests as a bigger percentage of quests in the zone, probably till about level 10 or 15. So it means we have less work to do on zone quests and more work to do on backgrounds. But the background quests are turning out to be a lot easier to write because they're very directed. It's almost like when you're writing the backgrounds, you have an easier context in which to place quests. And our quest designers are telling me that they're writing them faster, and because they're very specific to a kind of background you're playing, they get really good at doing those, so they can make more of them faster than they could make just somewhat generic zone quests that anybody could do. So hopefully that's going to balance out towards the end.
Is there a growing awareness among the game design community that game writing is not always delivered up to the quality of a novel?
Yeah, the question was, is there an awareness among the game design community that game writing isn't always up to the level of novel writing? Yes. I'm having trouble. I went to the panel yesterday on how new writers can get into the industry, and I wanted to ask a question, but I waited, and then we ran out of time. My question was, how do I screen a writer? I know a lot of writers are worried about how can they make their resume so that I get the attention of the person who's going to hire me and convince him that I'm good for his game. I have the opposite problem. We have a lot of resumes come in, and I'm not sure how to grab someone who's going to be perfect for writing stories for our game, because it's not a novel and it's not a movie. And I like my game quest to be very nonlinear. So when I ask my writers often when they write me a story, well, what if I didn't do this? What if I didn't kill him? Or what if when I rescued the cat, I asked for more money? Or what if I found the cat and the cat was dead? Or what if, I just went and got another cat that looked similar and said, here's your cat? Can I do a quest like that? Can you write me quests like that? So I'm pushing them, and it kind of requires a different kind of writing mentality than you would get in a novel. Because I'm not asking for linear writing. I'm asking for nonlinear writing. Yeah.
What do you feel the advantages are of having this kind of story in an MMO as opposed to having this kind of story in a single player game? What do you gain by putting it into the MMO space?
Well, and the question was, what do I gain by putting this in an MMO? I want story in all of my games. I know John Carmack said a few years ago that you don't go to a basketball game to hear a story. So he doesn't see why every game needs a story. I think a good game with a story is a great game. So it's a form of just, I think it improves the overall game itself to have this wonderful story at the end. I think it provides a context for people writing zone stories to know that this is going to be used later in the context of a bigger story, so it helps them understand the zone story. So it helps make our zone stories more consistent and more coherent. So it's a design help to have it. And then just for players, I think having something like this at the end of the game to do besides raiding or PvPing or trade skilling, those kind of activities appeal to very different people. And I think there are many people who, when they get to the end of all the zone stories in an MMO, they just immediately restart at level 1 and start playing again, because they're not interested in raiding and they're not interested in playing PvP. This will give them another option of things to do. Or at the very least, it'll give you an option of things to do solo when your friends aren't logged in, so you're doing those other activities. Yeah.
Are you worried or excited that your players would expect a new world story and an expansion pack?
Oh, I'd be excited. This is something that, I don't want to put out an expansion pack that's just a bunch of new zones and saying, here's 10 more levels you can level up with. I would want to keep continuing this story. So there's another thing I put on my writers. I don't want every last loose end wrapped up in the story at the end of the game. I want there to be enough interesting threads of the story that we can continue them for many, many more novels. So it's kind of like we're making a Song of Fire and Ice, or something that's not just a standalone novel, but it's designed to be a decalogy. This first game will be the first in a series, hopefully, of such games.
I worked on MMOs for a while, and I think that a failure of writing MMOs is that people try to write words rather than with the events that the character or the players experience with their characters, because they're playing a character in a story, and when you try to present them a script or something to read, you get bored because it's not the type of storytelling they're interested in. They're
Right.
interested in what their characters do. It's like, how do your writers, how do you translate the ideas of your writers, like the words of them, into gameplay elements that players can experience rather than read?
So the question was, how do I have my writers translate their writing into something that the player doesn't have to read? First off, I put a very small limit on how big a quest text can be. It's very small. It's something like what a Twitter would be, a tweet. And the quest designers, they railed against that for a while. They thought it was too small. I can't possibly, tell my story in that. But what I constantly impress upon them is you don't tell a story by telling the player what he's going to do. You have the player go do it. So all they really need is what appears in the quest tracker, which is, go find this. Go find this guy. And if you find that he's been kidnapped by someone, you're going to pick up on, there's this faction that's opposing this faction, and they're kidnapping someone, they're threatening to kill him. You'll get that from in-game events. You don't have to have that stated in the quest log. No one's going to read the quest log anyway. Most people don't read the quest log. And most quest designers don't like to hear that most people don't read their quest log. So by limiting them to a very small set of text, it forced them to use the game itself to kind of reveal these events. I'm noticing more NPCs that say something to me in a chat bubble when I come near them. An event that plays out where I can see that, there's a bandit fighting, a guard. And so I know that bandits are starting to attack this town. I don't have to have some quest giver standing there saying, hey, bandits are attacking our town. You can see bandits attacking the town. And I much more prefer that kind of active world to one where the story is completely exposited inside of a quest log.
I have two questions which are kind of similar, if I may. The first is, so your player starts off and they have these background story quests, which are really interesting and really engaging and feel very personal to the player, because the quests they're getting are related to choices they make during character creation. And then as they level up a little bit, those start tailing off and they start getting generic quests to go collect 10 rat butts. And are you worried about the player dropping when they start seeing the quests get more homogenized? They'll be disappointed if they no longer have these quests that were tailored to them.
I hope not. What tends to happen is the background quests get people pulled into the game world, and then when they're playing, there's other rewards that are pulling them through up to the level cap. Just going up a level and being able to get cool items and all the other rewards that you get from doing these things. And plus, I'm trying to have them avoid making too many of these just kill 10 rats and bring me back their butts. So we're trying to avoid those. We call them high-value quests, and we're trying to intersperse enough high-value quests throughout all our zones that there's always a lot of interesting things for you to do, even if they're not a background quest. Yeah, right.
How do you address issues of customability with the backgrounds? Like, are there like 6 stories, so you can play through it like 6 times, and it's the same? Like, if one player plays like the drunk father background, and somebody else also plays it, are they going to have the same experience, or is there things in matching with character classes and other things that change it?
We actually do vary. When you go into a zone and you get the missions that you get for your background, they're actually pulled from a subset that exists, which means even if you're playing with a friend who's playing the exact same background as you may be asked to do different things. So that's great for if you're playing with someone with the same background, or if you want to replay, you're going to get new things to do in the same zones. We also have zone overlap, so not every... There's different zones you can go to play for a particular level range, and those have different missions to do. So there's a lot of replayability in that. Also, how you get some of the background missions done vary by what your main class is. So a class with a particular background may play a little differently than another class with a different background, even if you get the same missions to do. Some of them will be easier, some of them will be harder. And we're running low on time, so I'll take a couple more questions.
I was wondering, do you think your background mechanic to suck in the player at the beginning still holds when a new player is joining an established player that's a friend of his? Because I know in my experience, I've never joined an MMO at the same time as a friend. He's already, it's either I'm an established person or he is. And a lot of times I feel like I'm playing catch up. And that almost propels me through faster. And I regard the story less just because I'm trying to catch up to my friend. I want to do things with him.
Well, you can view the background missions as just the quest you have to do to level up, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to level you up. So you can go through them as quickly as you want. If what you're saying is you can play those background missions with your friend and go through them very quickly just to get them out of the way, and he's helping you, people who aren't on your missions can help you do your missions. And some people on different backgrounds will find themselves in the same play space with completely different missions. You're supposed to find something and they're supposed to kill something, but you go to the same place to do it. So I'm hoping that when people play through these, they just do the background missions no differently than they would zone quests. It's just you have access to all the missions you're supposed to do, and so you can direct yourself through the play space. Okay, one more. Let's go to someone we haven't asked.
As a writer, do you ever feel comfortable letting your audience vote by their actions where your world story needs to go? I mean, you said you want a unified end story, that everybody kind of experiences the same end. Would you ever feel comfortable letting your audience give them a few choices and say, in the expansion, based on what you guys do here, popularity rules, this is where the world's going to go. You let the castle burn, it burns.
Right. I wouldn't be shocked at all if the idea for our expansion, it started as a forum post by one of our players. Players have brilliant ideas, and they also read into your story in ways you didn't imagine. I would love to do that. The biggest problem I'm worried about is we allow multiple endings for the storyline. Which one of those endings do we pick? If we do it right, there won't be a single most popular one. If they're all like rich and involved and different, we'll have to just pick one and go forward with it on the expansion. But if one of them comes out as the clear winner, we'd be stupid not to make that the one we roll with in the future. So, all right, thank you very much. I've been asked to remind you. I'm going to ask to remind you to fill out the evaluation forms when you exit out the back door instead of going out the side. There will be someone waiting to take this. Thank you. Hi.